We work to solve problems related to unemployment, food security, healthcare, and energy.
What makes us different is that all ventures have a for-profit model to get more and more people involved and improve more livelihoods.
We have to think about scalable solutions.
It starts with listening and identifying what the problems are.
And you can go to a community and build a greenhouse for them, but there are thousands and thousands of communities like those.
How do we design something that's going to be able to spread throughout Eastern Africa?
All our solutions are market-based, and what's really exciting for us is that this entire model is perfectly self-sustaining.
The solutions are definitely not all engineering-based.
Because the problems we're facing in communities are not a single discipline. It requires a holistic solution.
So it really has brought together students from many different disciplines.
And so you're learning from them at the same time. And you're also having the chance to do research as an undergrad.
They're taking information, testing research designs, and bringing back what they learned from communities to improve their research design. It's just a wonderful example of engaged scholarship.
We need people to believe that this is what universities should be doing. And over time, you kind of build this critical mass of students and faculty, and that's how you kind of change the culture of the campus.
The experience is very enlightening, it's very eye-opening, and it just really teaches you a lot of lessons about yourself and your country and your culture.
I've been able to learn what it's like to be more of a global professional, even as a student.
They're learning how to innovate from the Kenyan partners.
They're bringing back that knowledge here. They're putting it into the classroom.
If we do it right, the learning will come. If we do it right, the research publications will keep rolling out. But at the end of the day, it's all about impact.
Great, so my name is Khanjan Mehta. I'm a professor at Penn State University in engineering design. I am the director of program in humanitarian engineering and social entrepreneurship. Essentially, we bring together students from every single college across campus, through a common classroom, and we work on global development challenges. So today I'm going to talk about social entrepreneurship. I'm going to talk about design for development communities, and I'm going to talk a lot about failure. I'm going to talk a lot about why ventures in developing countries fail and what can we do about it. But before I talk about all these failures, I don't want you to think that I'm one heck of a loser. And so I'm going to take a little bit of time to tell you about some of the things that we are doing, that we have done right, or at least we're trying to do right. So the question is, how do we engage with developing communities to create sustainable technology ventures that lead to self-employment improvement in lives and livelihoods? So that is the question. So in my program, we work on global development challenges. Most of the work is based in Africa. We have business going on in Kenya, Cameroon, Rwanda, and Uganda, a whole lot of other countries. We just got started working on.
So we've been working in a bunch of African countries and some in South Asia as well. The basic concept that I want you to understand first is the base of the pyramid. So maybe some of you are familiar with it, maybe not. The basic idea is that we have over 7 billion people in the world. And out of those 7 billion people, you have over 1 billion that live on more than $60 a day. You have 1.4 billion between $10 and $60 a day. You have 3 billion between $2 and $10 a day, and 1 billion between less than $2 a day. And traditionally, we've thought about these folks at the base of the socioeconomic pyramid as passive recipients of charity. Over the last 50 years, we've spent trillions of dollars on projects to help them pull out of poverty, and most of these projects have been grossly unsustainable. So a different narrative, and one that championed by C.K. Prelegent, was about the base of the pyramid and the basic idea that while these people individually may not have as much money, collectively they have enormous clout. And how can we design products and services for these people and think of them as our collaborators and co-conspirators in this journey to pull them out of poverty? Instead of giving them a handout, how do we give them a hand up? This is also important because if you look at how the innovation game has changed, it's not necessarily that the next venture is going to emerge in Silicon Valley or Boston. It could be here in Katowice, it could be in Bombay, it could be in Nairobi. So some of you might have heard of the Tata Nano car, which is a $2,000 car, which sells for about $3,000 now. That's an excellent price point. And now it's working its way into Western markets. Or Ushahidi, which is a venture that emerged right after the riots in Kenya in 2007. And it's basically a map. It's essentially a crowd mapping platform for emergency response relief. And it was used during Hurricane Katrina, it was used during the Haiti earthquake, it's been used all over the world, and it did not come out of the US, it did not come out of Western Europe, it came out of Kenya. So innovation is, the way innovation happens is changing, and it's changing very radically. So we live in a globalized, interdependent world, and that's the basic framework under which we have an academic program with a series of courses where we challenge students to understand these challenges and work collaboratively to find ways to address them. We work in two areas. We have a bunch of ventures on food security. This is what our greenhouse looks like. In East Africa, you can buy a greenhouse for about $2,500. This greenhouse costs about $500. It is smaller, but it's designed for the context. It was designed for people in rural areas. The return on investment is about 3 to 6 months. It works beautifully. One of our initial problems was some of the vegetables grown in this greenhouse were so big that people were actually scared of them. They thought there was some sort of witchcraft. And we actually had to educate them that these are just as natural and safe to eat. We're working on mango waste briquettes to convert organic waste into briquettes, which is a good replacement for charcoal. We're figuring out how can we take aspirational foods like pizza and package them in a really elegant manner while changing the nutrition so that it is much more nutrition than what your typical pizza would be. And how do we get this to the people through food carts as a replacement of traditional street foods? On the other side of the house, we have a bunch of ventures grouped together under the Mashup umbrella. These are focused on pre-primary healthcare. Mashup means chubby cheeked in Kiswahili, and it's a sign of good health. It exists because in the US, there is one doctor for every 390 people. In parts of East Africa, there's one doctor for every 50,000 people. So even if healthcare itself is free, getting there is pretty expensive. That's the gap that we are trying to address with our telemedicine system. We actually have a venture running with a positive cash flow for the last 2.5 years. And at this point, we are simply collecting the money and figuring out how do we scale this up. We finally got to this point after about 15 different design iterations and iterations of our business model. We also work on low-cost diagnostics. Here's a $10 Pulse Oximeter that works just as well as a device that can cost anywhere from $100 to $500. This thing is designed for the context. If you look carefully, it's actually a metal hinge. It's a door hinge. And our newer version is all metal. It works beautifully. And yet this is one of our spectacular failures. Why? I'll tell you that in a few minutes. So now we are moving towards devices that are really easy to manufacture, like test strips to screen pregnant women for urinary tract infections or to screen people for diabetes. So this is one of our exciting projects with faculty in material science. And what's innovative about this technology is that you can actually print these test strips on an inkjet printer. So you take an inkjet printer, you remove the ink, you put in specific chemicals, and you print an entire sheet with over 100 test strips. How do we get them to the hands of the people? That's the biggest challenge, right? That's the last mile challenge. How do we do that? Through our community health worker network. So our primary goal is to create or improve livelihoods for our health workers. The secondary goal is to improve access to healthcare and screen people for UTIs and diabetes and whatever else. We're just getting started working on 3D printed prosthetic devices, which can be manufactured for less than $20. So in essence, we design with communities and we commercialize for larger markets, because that's the only way we can sustain ventures and we can scale up our impact. Of course, I'm a professor, so I have to do research to keep my job, and we do a lot of research in all aspects of humanitarian engineering and social entrepreneurship, trying to design new technologies, trying to find business models, trying to solve the problem of access to capital, and everything else, whatever it takes to get the job done. So now I'm going to get into a whole bunch of questions that our teams ask people on the ground, our partners in these countries, as we are trying to conceptualize ventures, as we are trying to develop new technologies, field test them, and figure out the business strategies. Do I really need to hold this? Can I do that? Okay. All right, so the first question is the technology affordable? So we know that 40 to 60% of the food grown in the world is wasted because there is no way to get it to a shelf-stable form. So what happens? The food just rots. So let's say it is tomato time and there are tomatoes all over the place, but there are only so many tomatoes you can consume. So the rest of it rots. So how do we extend the shelf life of food products? Well, here's a solar food dryer that costs about $5,000. It worked great, but $5,000 is way beyond what somebody in East Africa can afford. And that's why it's in the state that you see it in now. So the first question is it affordable? So we designed for very specific price targets. We didn't say, let's design a greenhouse. The question was, greenhouses cost $2,500 right now. Can we design a greenhouse that can be put together by 2 people in 2 days for less than $200? Constraints drive innovation. Do we go with high-tech solutions or low-tech solutions? I've seen a whole bunch of nonprofits that take books, like tons and tons of books, and books, are very heavy, and ship them to Africa. Because there are people should have access to books, and yes, I'm an educator, I totally get the whole argument, but look, how many people are going to wake up one fine day and say, today I'm going to study organic chemistry? How many of you would do that? Right? So what makes us think that somebody in Africa is going to wake up someday and read this book on nanotechnology? Is there a better way to do it? What if everybody had a Kindle? Would that be more efficient? Would that be more effective? I'm going to tell you about another one of our awesome ventures around a telemedicine system where we started with laptops, we've moved on to netbooks, we use smartphones in 10 different ways, and right now we use pen and paper. Excellent example of a technology venture. In a setting where technology just doesn't work, it's just not practical. So you have to innovate to solve a problem. You don't innovate for innovation's sake. You don't integrate technology just for the sake of having technology. It should make sense, it should work. So low-tech or high-tech, in what situation do you use what technology? Is there a business model? So that pump over there, that's called a play pump. It pumps water from point A to point B. And when all those children are playing on it, that's when it's pumping the water. It's a great, great model, right? It's like Monsters saying, we scare because we care. It works, but the problem is that it costs $1,000. How many nonprofits, how many orphanages can afford a $1,000 merry-go-round in their backyard? So the model is that Western countries will be paying for these, and then they will have advertising on top of the tank. But there is one problem. There are very few companies that are interested in advertising in rural areas. And so that concept just doesn't work. So this is another spectacular failure. Do we design products for individuals, or do we design them for communities? Or do we find some sort of a happy medium between the two? So Husk Power Systems is a phenomenal social venture in India. And they essentially convert rice husks, wheat husks, any kind of husk into electricity. And distributing it is a very lossy process. And so they figured out a way to charge people for the number of appliances they have in their homes. How do they enforce it? By peer pressure. People live next to each other. They know who has how many lights and how many televisions and how many radios. So you just pay for those many devices. It works in specific settings. Let's try to find that medium between individual and community with the realization that the world is changing and moving towards more and more nuclear families. How much do we simplify technologies? This is a big one. We want to make them as simple as possible. Yes. That's what half of you here are doing, right? Trying to figure out how do we make things really accessible, really simple. One of my grad students was in India, and he actually figured out, while spending a lot of time in the field, that most people would not use their mobile money transfer systems. They would actually go to the closest little corner shop and request that person to do it for them. In which case, you don't need to design the experience for this person who just doesn't have the agency to operate the system himself or herself. You need to design it for that person at the corner shop. And that actually makes your life a little easier because you can train that person, you can incentivize that person to run this system. And that's also a great business model. Is it socially acceptable? And this is something I can talk about for hours. So how many of you have seen a treadle pump? So that thing is called a treadle pump. It's like a Stairmaster. As you're working on it, you're pumping water from point A to point B. So the story goes that women had to walk long distances, and even now most women have to walk long distances to get to the water. But instead of walking back and forth for 4 hours, you could work on this for 45 minutes, and you would have the water to, for whatever, for domestic use, for your little farm, whatever else. Sounds great, right? So now the women can go to school. And yes, this has worked in many parts of the world, but not everywhere. In some parts of the world, it has not worked because when the women are walking with their friends to where the water is, that's their happy hour, that's their gossip time. And they don't want to give that up. In some places, when they get to where the water is, that's where the men are waiting for them. That's how their courtship procedure works. And you're disrupting that very important aspect of their culture. In some places, it doesn't work because when the women are working on it, the sway of their hips is considered provocative. So there are some men who are not happy about it, and I'm sure there are others who are really happy about it. But between those two groups of people, the technology gets bundled up. And there are umpteen examples of how that lack of social acceptability inhibits ventures. So we must be cognizant of that, but we also have to remember that at the end of the day, culture is not static. We cannot museumify culture. Culture evolves. And individuals and communities decide what aspects they want to retain in their culture and which ones they want to do away with. So culture is dynamic. Will customers use it? So remember that $5,000 solar food dryer? We set out to build a solar dryer that can be put together by 2 people in 2 days in less than $200. We actually did it for $120. It worked great. We'd spoken to over 50 farmers before we did it. And then we went back to the farmers and said, hey, guys, look, here's this solar food dryer that you wanted. And they said, yes, that's great, and we would love to make some more money, but guess what? At the end of the day, we are not going to use it. Why? Because we are farmers. We don't want to do all this drying business. Sure, we want to make money, but we're not going to do all that work. We're going to stay true to what we are good at. So drying is somebody else's job, and you got to design it for that person, no matter what people say. Does it meet every need? So that's a solar food cooker, and I've seen a lot of projects around solar food cookers, and I've worked in over 15 countries, I've traveled across more than 45 countries, I've never ever seen anybody actually pay for one of these food cookers. And it's very simple. I can't imagine cooking my food inside that. Can you imagine making your pierogies, your soups, your whatever inside that thing? Can you make pizza in that? Is it going to have the same taste and the same texture? Is it going to meet all your sensory needs? That's really important to us, right? And it's important to them as well. There are also other issues. When you have a little fire, you might be smoking out your house and getting rid of the insects. That's how you might be heating up your little home. So does it meet every single need? It's a question we must ask our teams. Do we localize our technology for a very specific group of people? Or do we standardize it for a broader audience and bring the cost down further so that it is accessible and affordable to more people? Affordability trumps everything. And yes, there are times when you have to localize, but you want to make that decision for every specific context very carefully. Is it beautiful? So that's one of our beautiful greenhouses. It costs about $600 to $1,000 depending on what country you buy it in. The margins are pretty different. And we got some funding from the EPA to see how we can replace the glazing, the plastic covering, with rice packs coated with specific materials. And that way we could bring the cost down even further by about $100. We went back to the farmer and said, hey, would you like to bring the cost down by $100? Look, you can pay your loans back faster. And they said, yes, that would be a good idea, but frankly, we don't mind paying a little bit more because we want the greenhouse to look just as pretty as our neighbors. So the rice bags were not sexy enough for them, and they want their product to be sexy. They have less money, and so they are all the more particular about what they put their money into. So poor people expect just as good, high-quality products. And by designing them for them, you can actually help them in so many ways. So do you go after human labor, and do you try to create more jobs in developing countries? Or do you automate food processes? Does anybody know what that is? So that's called injera. It's the national bread of Ethiopia, made from a really tiny grain called teff. One of the problems in Ethiopia is that as with gradual desert, whoa. So with gradual desertification of the country, it's getting harder and harder to get firewood to make injera. People are moving to the cities, and they don't have the space to make injera because the thing you need to make this, the griddle is huge. So they're moving to eating bread. If you can actually mass manufacture injera, that would be a way to help them retain the most important aspect of their culture, their bread. It's their bread, guys, it's their bread. And they're losing it to our bread. And mass automation can actually help them preserve culture. Do you get the drift of what I'm saying? Each of these questions is a trade-off. There are no rules. Each of them is a very specific trade-off for a very specific context. So, one of our failures, who is going to manufacture it? Sure, you can make a $10 device that works just as well as a $200 device. It works beautifully. Who is going to manufacture it? Because if you have a $200 device on which you have a $150 profit margin, why would you be interested in cannibalizing your own market with a device on which your profit margin is only $3? Sure, people in Africa would benefit, but who cares? You've got to make money. Right? So you need different thinking to get your product ready and get your product into the marketplace. And does it have to be manufactured locally? Or can it be manufactured in China? In fact, some of the most successful products I see in developing countries, especially in the African continent, are not made locally because making it locally is very expensive. They are made in China. They're made in other places where it's cheaper to make these products. Some of them are assembled on site, but that's a different issue, and that's doable. So what is your competition, and can you actually compete? And you just don't know what your competition is. First of all, as you know, as entrepreneurs, there is no such thing as no competition, right? Because your customers can always do nothing. They can always go with the default option. So there is always competition. And then you have competition like this. You know who that is? As the president of Gambia. A few years back, he declared how he could cure AIDS. And what does that mean when the president of a country is very emphatically saying that he can cure AIDS? What does it mean for all the nonprofits that are providing various services to people with HIV, that are trying to create awareness about HIV? That's tough competition. Who wins and who loses? Sure, you can create a new way of getting water at much lower cost to the people. But that might be taking away from the water sharks who are actually taking water and selling it into the black market at ridiculous prices. And I've myself seen water-related products fail because you're taking business away from the water sharks, who essentially run a little mafia of their own. So you have to be mindful of that. A few years back, we did a study of macadamia nuts. We found that in the rural areas, they sell for about 25 cents per kilogram. And just about 150 kilometers away, they sell for about $2 a kilogram. Right? Very substantial, 8 times as much. And there are about 5 to 6 different levels of middlemen. And the question is, how many of those layers of middlemen do you get rid of, and how many do you keep? Ultimately, for some of those farmers, they love the middlemen, they want the middlemen because that's the only way to get their product into the marketplace. Will it hurt the environment? There are a whole bunch of small ventures that depend on the little bit of power that you get from a lead-acid battery. And those batteries are fundamentally polluting. So do you design more technologies and use these batteries, or you don't? With the realization that if people, as they get more money, as they save more money, they're going to do things that are more ecologically sound. But do the means justify the ends? The big question is, will it reach the people? You might have the perfect product in your workshop, in your warehouse. how will you actually get it to the people? There is no Amazon, right? How will you get it to the people? The last mile challenge. That's where a lot of ventures fail. How will you educate your customers? It takes a lot of money to educate them. So here is one of Paul Polak's venture. He's a founder of International Development Enterprises, and he sells low-cost straddle pumps. And he's credited with bringing over 20 million people out of poverty. And he actually has a full-length, 2.5-hour-long movie where there's a boy and the girl, and they fall in love, but the boy is very poor, and then he gets his straddle pump, and he uses that to grow his little farm and make money, and ultimately has enough money to please the girl's father, and they get married and happily ever after. A 2.5-hour movie to educate people about what this technology is and how it works. And that's how you start building up your market share. Or you hire troubadours, you do skits, you do drama, and that's all part of this development and social entrepreneurship game. And the big, big question is, can you scale it? You can design solutions for 100 people, 1,000 people, 10,000 people. Can you design something that will address the needs of millions of people? Can you scale it up? And if you want to think about scale, scale cannot be an afterthought. You have to think about scale from day one, when you conceptualize a venture and conceptualize the entire concept of operations. So these are some of the questions that we think about when we try to figure out how do we design sustainable and scalable solutions. And that to us means 4 things. We want our solutions to be technologically appropriate. We want them to be environmentally benign. We want them to be culturally acceptable. And we want them to be economically sustainable. And all 4 aspects are just as important. There's no point having a great technology that is culturally acceptable, that's environmentally benign, but it just doesn't sustain itself in the marketplace. So all 4 aspects are just as important. So let's kind of put this in a somewhat more theoretical framework. So why do ventures fail, right? So those were some of the reasons. And we've always been kind of thinking about this, and we said, let's do a more rigorous study. So we looked at food value chains. We looked at the journey of food from production to processing to storage to marketing to distribution to consumption. A whole bunch of technologies can be used to streamline and strengthen all these phases in food value chains. And we looked at 120 different projects. We spoke to 500 actors in these food value chains in 4 different countries. And we spoke to about 25 experts. And we essentially looked at the entire life cycle of the venture, which is the journey from idea to prototype to doing a series of pilots to launching your venture. So that's the design phase. The implementation phase, when you launch the venture and you try to get your sales up and you're trying to reach maturity. And then you're in the maturity phase, you're basically steady state, things are working fine. At some point you have to reinvent yourself or you die, right? Most of you should have seen this before. So we looked at ventures at these 3 different stages, and here's what we found. So I get this question, I've got this question 4 or 5 times today. Why do projects fail? What happens? So here's what happens. Projects fail for a very wide variety of reasons. They fail because they don't actually meet a specific need. Outsiders think that there is a need, but the people don't see the need. Ventures fail because the products are just not manufacturable in that context. They fail because of the limitations of the designers. They fail because of usability concerns. They fail because they are just too complex, or because they don't align with the culture, or they don't align with the context. So these are some of the potential failure modes. But it gets more interesting here. The vast majority of reasons why ventures fail is not during the design phase. They fail during the implementation phase. They fail because farmers or whoever is supposed to use it can't get access to capital, because they can't maintain trust in their product, because they don't price them right. Gender dynamics, customer education, strategic planning and pivoting. Entrepreneurship is the art of pivoting. You've got to keep adapting till you figure out your niche. Partners and champions, product quality control issues, operational organization issues, competition management, team dynamics, legal challenges, especially moving from the informal economy to the formal economy. So these are all the different reasons why ventures fail during the implementation phase. And then they fail during the maturity phase for issues like stakeholder management, marketing, organizational management, legal issues, standardizing the concept of operations, continued innovation, and supply chain issues. Standardizing the concept of operations is one of the biggest challenge. And the point here is that if you want to grow your company, you want to have a very standardized concept of operations, a very standardized user experience, right? But as you start to grow, how do you make sure that it happens? You have to start adding more employees. And soon enough, you realize that those employees need a lot of money, and you just can't sustain all those employees that exist to standardize your ConOps. And that's where a lot of ventures of this sort, trying to pull people out of poverty, fail. So what, right? So what? So what does this all mean? And it means 7 things to me. And I'll go through these very quickly so that we have some time left for discussion and question and answers. So first of all, the question is not what the problems are. There are a lot of problems. The question is, what are the problems for which we can design and deliver sustainable solutions? So change your way of thinking. Second, we should not be focusing on the design of a specific product. The basic value, the basic unit of value creation is this ensemble. It's the process that creates value. You could be creating value by drying your tomatoes or drying your fish or drying your bananas. Let's say for drying the tomatoes, the solar dryer is one part of that process. But before that, there is a whole bunch of steps for pre-processing, and there could be some post-processing steps after that. And this makes money for somebody. And that entire process is the basic unit of value creation. And that's exactly what we should be designing. We should be designing that entire ensemble, that entire business in a box. What it also means is that there's an overlap between the design of the product, the business model, and that concept of operations, that process that creates value. So if you're trying to figure out whether we should have a centrifuge or not, why should we have a centrifuge? Because if you know that instead of having 10 hours of sunlight, you have only 4 hours of sunlight, you can get only so much out of your solar dryer. What if you chop up the tomatoes earlier and you use a centrifuge to bring the water content from 96% to 60%, 50%, and then you use the solar dryer to optimize its usage? Does that make sense? Once you start thinking about those trade-offs, your design space is greatly enhanced. So in a nutshell, sorry if I'm getting too theoretical, the point is that don't think about the design of the product itself. Think about the design of the product, the design of the business strategy, and the design of that process all at the same time. And you're much more likely to be successful. So for us, for our health worker, what does our design ensemble look like? It looks like this. So this is one of our workers. She has her backpack in which she has some of her devices for measuring blood pressure, for checking people for their blood glucose levels. She has her weighing scale. She has her badge, which has signatures from a bunch of important people. She has her white coat that sets her apart as a Mashabu health worker. She has licenses from various authorities, so if somebody catches her, she can give them those papers and keep them happy. So you have to design that entire process, not just the weighing scale, not just that device. So start thinking in terms of ensembles. For our greenhouses, it's not just the greenhouse, but it's a soil testing regimen. It is all the publications that let us get it to a broader set of people. It's the licensing agreements that build on these publications. It is the training that we provide to all our employees. It's the design of our factory. It's a certificate down to that level of detail. It's a certificate we give our employees after they are trained. You have to design that entire ensemble if you want to be successful in these settings. Third is focus on execution. It's all about execution. It's not about idea. Ideas are worthless. They're a dime a dozen. Nobody pays you for ideas. It's all about execution. Look at the companies around you. Google did not come up with the first search engine, right? They got it out there. They made it work. They got people to buy into it. So it's all about execution. And that journey from point A to point B does not look like that. It looks like that. You go through a lot of iterations, and you have to be ready for those iterations. And the fun part here is that developing countries are great places to do some of these iterations. They are lean, the people are much more open to new ideas. You can test things very quickly, and it's not as expensive to test things. And to actually test it and to get it right, you have to build very practical partnerships on the ground with organizations that understand how these cultures work, how people think. The demographics are important, but the psychographics are even more important. Fifth, you need to reframe research. And I know that most of you are practitioners and you don't think so much about research, but for us, learning, research, and engagement go hand in hand. And when we think about research, we do a lot of publishing, but the larger question is, how do we take this knowledge and get it out to the practitioners? How do we get practitioners to quickly understand this guy who runs a small business, what is he thinking? What does he do? He has a battery that operates his phone, he lets people make phone calls, and runs a small business. That's how he puts food on the table. What is he thinking? How does he get access to capital? What challenges does he face? How do you educate him about it? Or this woman with a bag of corn funded by the US Agency for International Development, what is she thinking? Is development aid a blessing or a burden? What do those dynamics look like? How do you get people to quickly understand this? And there are many ways to do it. In essence, the point is that we talk about how we want to teach people how to fish, but that's actually extremely impractical because the vast majority of the people that I work with in Kenya and Sierra Leone and Mozambique are outstanding fishermen. So it's not about teaching them how to fish. It's about understanding that entire ecosystem, the political issues, the cultural issues, and the other systemic marginalization that some of the stakeholders have, and then designing something that works for them. So it's about revolutionizing that fishing industry. And to do that, how do you get that message across quickly? One, use a lot of multimedia, have a respect for indigenous knowledge, have a respect for local perspectives on problems and solutions. Personas. So we develop personas for all the stakeholders we work with and make them available to our teams. And then we engage in a lot of role play activities. We've designed a bunch of example-centric design tools. So this is an example-centric design tool for designing biomedical devices. And it has over 150 examples organized in 18 different categories that give designers examples of what went right, what went wrong in specific contexts. Here's another innovation where essentially, look, I have these 80 publications. Who reads them? A very, very, very small set of people who read papers. The rest of the people, nobody reads them, really, right? How many of you read research papers on a frequent basis? And how many can you actually read? I have the same problem with my students. So what we did essentially is take personal experiences gleaned over the last 10 years, integrate that with community perspectives, with development concepts, with the larger knowledge base, primary research, facts and statistics, best practices, a lot of them from the Poverty Action Lab at MIT, a little bit of Bollywood drama and a lot of custom illustrations to put together a series of short stories called the Kochia Chronicles. So this is all based on hardcore research, but it is presented in the form of narratives. And you can actually just search for Kochia Chronicles and you can download it free of cost on ResearchGate. So look it up, and if you really want to understand some of the real on-the-ground challenges from the perspective of the people, this would be a great way to get a lot of content very quickly. And it's free. So it gets into really messy issues like customs and traditions, and how do they help and how do they hurt, and how can they lead to social innovation. The real meaning of community and how do you leverage that community for deeper engagement, especially in marginalized communities in radically different contexts. It gets into this, a funeral. Marriages and funerals are some of the most important aspects of cultures. In East Africa, people spend up to 10 years' income on a single funeral. Imagine, would you spend 10 years' income on a single funeral, and what does it mean for you, for your economics, for your family, for the rest of your life? And how do you change that? It gets into issues of like the orphanages. There are millions and millions of orphans, and you have orphanages to help them, and most of these are run like businesses. So it kind of gets into the inner workings of how orphanages work and how they don't work, and the importance of educating donors. And finally, it gets into issues of sustainable aquaculture, and the real challenge behind the stupidity and the naivete in the saying applied to this context that you teach them how to fish. Because a whole bunch of systemic issues. And it follows this one fisherman who cannot go out to the lake because of this water hyacinth, and how they come together and develop very lean and inclusive business models to address the problem. It gets into issues of epistemologies and issues of perspectives from the people on how they view outsiders. So Busa is a local alcohol, and it's basically that happy hour where a bunch of Kenyans are sitting around and they're talking about all their experiences with white people coming into their communities and doing funny things, like coming and painting walls. And they're wondering why. Why did they spend $50,000 to come all the way here and paint this wall, and now they're going to go back? What is the net value of that? And it's essential to get into things like systems thinking, self-determination, building relationships, lean business models, social innovation, but most importantly, how things work and how to get stuff done. That's what this is about, because that's the only way we will teach people, designers, engineers, innovators, on what the real challenges are. So before we go out and try to change the world, we work with people who really want their world to be changed. Because a lot of people don't want their world to be changed, or they want to change it on their terms and not on our terms. And finally, and my last point is about changing the conversation. How many of you have thought about global development and working in resource-constrained settings, whether it's in Latin America or South Asia or Africa, as a real career pathway? Do you know what the growth rate of the Kenyan economy is? About 10%. Sierra Leone, about over 20%. What is the growth rate of the Polish economy? I know it's great, but is it 20%? 3%? Somewhere down there, the US is 1%. It's getting a little bit better now, but still. So there are amazing, amazing opportunities in resource-constrained settings where you can develop your careers, and you can also create value and help a lot of people at the same time. Entrepreneurship is incredibly difficult, as a previous speaker pointed out. Social entrepreneurship is even more difficult. And there is no exit strategy. You may never make millions and billions. But there is still that value you are creating where you're solving problems. And that has its own value if you appreciate it. So we looked at career pathways of over 60 different individuals who do social value creation in the US, or they work in international development. And here's what we found. Most of them are professional, independent, and innovative. Most of them went to grad school. They do a balance of fieldwork and paperwork. They engage in very meaningful extracurricular activities. They all have had an education in the STEM field, science, technology, education, math, with a whole bunch of design professionals. And for them, it was not about the equations and programs. It was developing a mindset. It was developing an analytical framework. They all took a circuitous path to the current position, and their salary range varied from $30,000 to $300,000 for engaging in the developing world. And that is pretty good money. The median income is $80,000. So this is not something you do as like a nonprofit. You can do this as a real professional pursuit. And that's why we need to change the conversation, that this is a career path. So what do? Step up, get stuff done, take the plunge. Now's the time to do it. So in essence, it's about 4 things to get ventures to work in the developing world in resource-constrained settings. It's all about execution. It's about smart partnerships. It's about storytelling. And it's about, well, intelligent storytelling with metrics and the whole 9 yards. But you still have to do that storytelling. And it's about changing the conversation about development. And that, I think, is a holy grail of social entrepreneurship. We need to build ecosystems that foster multi-million smile enterprises. You might want to be a traditional entrepreneur and build a multi-million-dollar enterprise, or you could be a social entrepreneur and build a multi-million smile enterprise. And I invite all of you to take the plunge. So thank you.